Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at Space Cowboy Books Online. I'm your host, Jean-Paul, and today we are celebrating, obviously, Aliens from Jennie Goloboy, a wonderful wild ride, a hilarious science fiction book. Just finished it this morning, actually, and loved it all the way through. Jennie Goloboy has appeared in Apex magazine with forthcoming short story in fantasy and science fiction. She self-published a novel and shorter fiction under her pen name, Nora Fleisker. Hopefully I got that right. She's also written about early American history, including a monograph based on her dissertation. She lives in Minneapolis with her husband and 2 children and works as a literary agent. I'm going to hand it over to Jennie to read an excerpt from the book, and then we will get into the interview section of the event. If any of the audience has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
Hey, well, thanks for hosting me, Jean-Paul. The one thing I'm going to explain is I'm reading a chapter from later in the book. And before I get into it, you have to know that Dana Elson, the main character in this chapter, has a somewhat unusual family. She has a dad who used to be a famous rock star, has in absolutely no way like Elvis. And by this point in the story, both her parents have passed away. And I'll start right here. Dana stood in her mother's empty house for the last time. It was times like this that she wished she had not another sibling. She had plenty of those, but another full sibling. In a lot of ways, it had been just her and Mom. And now it was just her. She stood in the kitchen, resting her hands on the counter, and thought, this is for the last time. Then she crossed through to the family room where she'd done her first drawings. This is for the last time. She inhaled the scent of the front hall. For the last time. She couldn't stand it. It was like watching by Mom's hospital bed again. So she got in her car and drove and didn't stop until she was at Dad's house in the desert. By the time she arrived, the sky was pitch black, and it seemed like every star in the sky was visible. She stepped outside and stopped for a moment. Standing out here always made her feel how big the universe was and how empty. But here was Dad's house, which always comforted her. How many times had she been here, first with her mother and then by herself? How often had she run here with all her little heartbreaks? She hadn't even packed a bag. Well, her siblings had left plenty of clothes behind, and there was a stash of toothbrushes somewhere. And Dana was an artist and an Elson, and she had the right to be flaky every once in a while. She opened the door and only then realized that the lights were on inside. Dana, a voice called, is that you? Her sister Sierra was sitting on one of the stools at the kitchen counter. There were 2 bottles of beer in front of her and a chip and dip with hummus and vegetables in it and 2 cloth napkins. She hopped down from the stool and held out her arms. I had a feeling, she said, that you'd want me to be here. Dana didn't believe in ESP or telepathy or any of that stuff, but she saw Sierra's face blur and she realized she'd started to cry. Yes, she thought, that's exactly what I want. She woke up the next morning to barking outside her window. Vigorous barking, not a coyote or a wolf, the sort of noise that would come from a small dog, say a corgi-sized dog, or a soft, fuzzy space spy who looked like a dog. Sadie, she whispered out the window. Yes, Sadie said. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Woof, said Dana and rolled over, pulling the stale, saggy pillow over her head. Could she sleep through Sadie's barking? She wasn't sure, but she was tired enough to try. Was Sadie here to arrest her? What would it be like in a jail run by corgis? She pictured sweet, fluffy dogs, wearing tiny prison guard uniforms, yipping at her ankles. Dana, said Sadie. Dana! She waited a moment and then started to bark again. She was amazingly loud for such a small animal. Dana heard the front door open and then Sierra's voice. Look at you! Hello, you sweet girl! Are you lost? There was a tiny bark as Sadie obviously got caught. I've got you, said Sierra. Let's take you inside. How about some water? Hey, good girl. And I might even have a nice can of dog food for you. Dana considered staying in bed and letting Sierra deal with Spy Dog. If Sadie arrived alone, the odds she was planning to arrest Dana were pretty small. So there must be something else Sadie wanted. As far as Dana was concerned, Sadie had blown her off when she needed help, and she was perfectly all right about returning the favor. But then again, what would Sadie do to Sierra? Grumbling and yanking down her brother Ace's ZZ Top t-shirt over her sister Mina's University of Arizona sweatpants, Dana trudged angrily to the kitchen. Sadie was slurping water out of the dish, but raised her lip when Sierra offered her a can of Alpo. I don't recognize this dog, said Sierra, and she's obviously someone's pet. Her fur looks really soft and fluffy. Sadie preened. Do you think one of our family left her behind? Continued Sierra. No, said Dana. I'm pretty sure she's my neighbor's dog. Back in Albuquerque? So how did she get out here? Sierra bent down and scratched Sadie behind the ears. Despite herself, Sadie looked pleased. I wish she could tell us. Yes, that would be interesting. But then Dana realized she could hear something, a sort of high-pitched whistling noise. Sadie whimpered and ducked under the kitchen table. Dana followed her, and so did Sierra. What is that? Said Dana. I don't know, said Sierra, but I've heard that dogs can detect all kinds of... Suddenly there was a gigantic crash outside. Barking excitedly, Sadie ran towards the front door. She scratched the door with her paws, leaving marks on the wood. Dana opened the door, and Sadie bolted out, followed by Dana and Sierra. Stopping only to pull on the sneakers she'd left by the front door, Dana chased Sadie across the sand, Sierra pounding behind. The three followed a long burned streak across the desert. Sadie stopped suddenly, and Dana did the same, catching her breath as she realized they'd come to a halt near the edge of a charred-looking crater. Half buried at the bottom of the crater was a small, silver, egg-shaped craft. It looked like an escape pod from a spaceship, Dana thought, as Sierra caught up to her and Sadie. This isn't safe. Maybe we should get back to the house, said Dana. The dog's not afraid, said Sierra. Animals are very wise about this kind of thing. What do dogs know about alien spaceships? Asked Dana. Come on, Sierra, before it notices. The door in the spaceship opened, and a pale human hand, sticking out of the end of a dark sleeve, emerged. A head of dark hair followed. The thing in the spaceship looked up, and Dana saw its bright blue eyes and handsome devil smile. Oh my God, she said. It's Dad. Sierra raised her hands in the air and waved them back and forth. Dad, she called. Over here! Standing next to her, Sadie let out a small whimper. It was just sad, thought Dana. When Dad was alive, he'd barely spent any time with her, and then he died when she was still a toddler. And here she was with this creature from a spaceship, and she'd bet her left kidney he wasn't really her father, and something in the back of her mind kept calling, Dad, Dad, I drew you a picture. Want to see? 25 years, said Dad. I can't believe it. What do you remember? Said Sierra, patting Dad's arm as they scaled the hill, walking back toward the house. He graced Sierra with a smile. The last thing I remember, I was in a hotel in Denver. A bathroom and a hotel in Denver, thought Dana, on the toilet. Dad's death had not been dignified. I must have passed out, Dad continued, and when I came to, I was in a spaceship, and these gray creatures with enormous eyes and tiny mouths had me on a thing like a metal doctor's table. They helped me to my feet, and they gave me these clothes, and they put me in that little spaceship over there, and then it just rocketed back home to Earth. I thought I was dead for sure when I saw the ground coming up so fast. What did the aliens want, do you think? Asked Dana. Dad looked at her and smiled. I remember you. You're Gwen's daughter, aren't you? The little smart one from Albuquerque. Still as bright as can be, I bet. Why was Dana so flattered? This wasn't Dad, and even if it had been, what good could flattery do her now? Every so often, Mom would get in a mood, and then she would start playing Dad's old love songs and take out the scrapbook she'd made about Dad. Then she'd look at her concert ticket, the pictures carefully trimmed from the concert program, a blurry selfie backstage, and then extensively documented photographs of her, Dad, and Dana in her prettiest little dresses on the few visits they'd had together. She was still angry at both of them, she realized. Mom for never moving on from the one central night of her life. Dad for being a profligate, wandering soul. How could she be so angry about the qualities in them that had resulted in her? Sierra opened the door. Dad walked inside and froze. He'd caught sight of himself in one of the gold-frosted mirrors. Not a geriatric rocker still trying to hold on to greatness, but back to being a handsome young man, the one who'd first become a star. Lucky you, thought Dana. Play your cards right, you got another 50 years of breaking hearts ahead of you. Why was she so angry at something that wasn't her father? And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jenny. So this book, obviously, Aliens, is really funny from start to finish. I mean, you hit the ground running with the humor, and it never goes away. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, when writing humor, what challenges do you face in sustaining that level of hilarity throughout a novel-length work?
Well, thank you. I feel like the thing is, you don't want to always be the same level of funny all the time. I mean, there, or at least I don't want to be. There's different kinds of funny, right? I mean, there's sort of, oh, there's the humor of transgression. There's the humor of deflating somebody's ego. But this, one of the things I like doing a lot, and I think I do it a lot in this book, is the humor where disaster looms, and then, oh my gosh, it wasn't the horrible thing we worried about after all. And to get that to work, you really have to have peaks and troughs and peaks and troughs. Um, but beyond that, I always feel like if once you've got the situation gets too stable, you need to sort of push the plot in a different direction or add another character. And honestly, the reason I wanted to read that section is Sadie the spy dog is one of my favorite characters, and she doesn't show up till, I don't know, halfway through the book, but she was so much fun to write for.
So in those situations, would you call that the humor of relief with the impending disaster?
I think so. I think so. I've realized that's something I really like to do, right? It's like I was so when I was trying to talk about this book to first trying to talk about this book to other people, one of the things I realized is that every time there is no sort of positive way to say it's a story about an alien invasion. It's always negative when it's an alien invasion. There's no like, the aliens show up and it's all basically okay, and we all learn to work together and live basically happily. So yeah, and the comedy of relief, it's uh it's one of those things that especially works for me, especially, you know, in our um current days of constant stress.
I got a few hints of Dadaism in there too, which I really appreciated, because I love absurdity, and we
Oh
don't
yeah.
see enough of it in science fiction for some reason.
Yeah. I don't know how you came into science fiction, but my sort of first documents were I loved Tom Baker era Doctor Who, which was Doctor Who at its silliest. And basically a genius dude who just wanted to hang out with interesting people and eat candy, and maybe you could have some candy too. And then there's and The Hitchhiker's Guide, which was my favorite book when I was I was a young teenager, and in some ways it's still a total inspiration to me.
I definitely picked up hints of Adams in the book, and a little bit
Yeah.
of Vonnegut, I might say too,
Oh yeah, he
with
was
the
also
way that
great.
it made me laugh. So at the core of, obviously, Aliens, how I read this was that the book is about friendships, really.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you could speak to handling relationships in writing, particularly around friendships.
Mhm. It was something I was really trying to focus on. I am like, we talk about different kinds of comedies. I am in love with the whole workplace comedy, the idea that we have to, where people who have absolutely nothing in common, sort of personality wise or ways they see the world, or are forced to work together for a common goal. And I it was really fun for me. I have it's I have two point of view characters. I'd say Dana is really the protagonist, but there's like a secondary protagonist who's Adam Shapiro, who was not in this chapter I just read. And it was really fun for me putting these two people in a car together and making them have to work together because he on first glance of each other, their first interactions with each other are sort of, oh, this person is horrifying, and they eventually find the things they have in common. But she's kind of this straight-laced overthinker, planner, has a strong artistic side, and he is I just kind of nuts, frankly, and has this weird background of being sort of a spy for a private corporation. And their first reaction is, there is no way we can work together. And then they find out, actually temperamentally, they're very similar. They like quiet. They are both very loyal. They both are in their own ways quite bright. And when they work together to have a common goal, they get what they want. So maybe not the way they anticipated, but they do. So it was fun writing that particular friendship. I think, and the joy of creating characters in a novel is it's the best part to me. And I mean, for other people love, oh, I'm going to write this big plot and it's all going to tick together. And yeah, this book in particular, it's like, there's plot, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. But having the arc of how the people change and learn to work together was important to me. And I think that's kind of the spine of the whole book.
And I appreciated how that friendship develops into something more filial. They end up calling each other brother and sister, which as deep friendships often do, end up feeling more like family. So I found that quite touching. And another one of the great relationships in the book is between Adam and his boyfriend, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
Jay is a very interesting character because he is occupying a body occupied by many different people. Did you face any challenges when working with multiple characters occupying the same body, both plot-wise and any grammatical difficulties that might come up with that?
Yeah, that one, okay, so like I said, some people are really good at planning out their plot in advance. I kind of one of those people. I left Jay in a very weird situation where he's part of a Gestalt entity with a whole bunch of aliens, and then I had to deal with it. And the problem with that is to make it clear that all the aliens are different people and they just all happen to share the same body. And we may not know any of them super well, but they exist as discrete individuals sharing the same body. I know this. Here's the problem with writing a science fiction novel. When you start explaining stuff in detail, it's like, wow, did I really go? Yes, that's where I ended up. So the challenge with that was to make it not like it's Jay and a bunch of aliens, but like, I tried to make them all have distinct possibilities that are personalities, sort of, and that meant, unfortunately, their personalities had to have really broad strokes. So in the tiny amount of time we get with each of them, we sort of, okay, I think that may be that dude. But yeah, it was sort of, so that was the challenge with that, is to make sure that you're aware that even when they're not on screen and inhabiting space and talking, that they are present. I hopefully I pulled that one off.
You did. In fact, one of the things I love about this book, I'm I'm a sucker for aliens in general. And there's various aliens in this book, much to my delight. So I wonder, what's the most enjoyable part of creating all of these various aliens, and how you go about deciding on what sort of personal and cultural attributes each species is going to have? And if I might add to that a little bit, the corgis are hilarious. I wonder if you could give us give our audience a little insight into the corgis, which is primarily a British problem, as you say in the book, which made me laugh out loud.
I just love the visual idea that, oh yeah. So one of the things in the book, I'll spoil the book slightly, is that all corgis are actually aliens. They just happen to look like dogs, so they do their thing on Earth in their natural forms, and they're all spying on us. Yeah. So if you see a corgi on the street, it also sees you. Just so you know. But I was always amused by the image of the late queen surrounded by corgis, and why are they all there? They're probably giving her advice. That's why it all makes sense. You can see it. Yeah, I just liked I liked the comedy of having a totally off the wall explanation for something that we would try to see as that probably has a much more normal explanation, which is they're cute. She liked them. she could have whatever pet she wanted. As for, there's another alien that we see a lot of in this book, and so again, there are some authors out there who are really good at figuring out like actual xenobiology, and like would figure out how does it work if you have how could you have a sentient totally underwater species, and how would they build, what would their, and I am not ever super interested in my own work in working out the biology, but I am really interested in working out the culture. And then once you figure out the physical determinants of life, what kind of plausible cultural explanations can you make out of that? There's a really interesting, let me get way off topic for like for like a minute here. There is a really wonderful historian named Fernand Braudel who passed away many, many years ago, and who told the history of the Mediterranean by starting out with geology and how that determines what could grow where, and how the easiest places, and then moving up into like the easiest places to travel between what sort of growing season, and then finally, after many thousand words, up into culture. And I don't know if people nowadays would do it the same way, but the idea that you can just sort of, the idea that you can start out with things like, oh, they're underwater, they don't carry their young internally, then well, how would a civilization that didn't carry their young internally maybe raise children? What if they raised them all in creches until they were old enough to have parents and go home? It's an interesting idea, and until we meet aliens like that, nobody can prove I'm wrong. So it was like I said, it was the cultural stuff, and I like the idea, the ability in an aliens book to go really, really wild with everybody's cultural assumptions and treat them with respect and dignity, and still find the oddness in there.
I'm attempting to avoid spoilers, but there's something in your world building, your culture building there, that that I found quite touching and interesting. And I think often about the nature of perception, and how we are, we will center our thinking around certain of our senses.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something in aliens, which is, could be drastically different just based on sensory perception. And one of the things that one of the alien species, the Poseidons, view color as poetry, and so they're confused by how colorful our world is. And I thought that was such a beautiful sentiment. And I wonder if maybe you could elaborate without too many spoilers about
Yeah.
that aspect of their culture.
Yeah, it was one of the fun things I was doing. Well, if they're communicating underwater, and what if they change color to try to express part of what they're trying to say? And what I really wanted to convey with that is like, there is, if you've ever had the experience of going from one language to another, there's something incredibly challenging about speaking naturally in one way and then having to go to another way where it's like rolling stuff uphill. And I wanted to find a way that worked as metaphor for that, to talk about what that was like, to go from one language and one set of assumptions to another. So yeah, the Poseidons communicate partly through color, and there is the sense of, what is it like when you can't do that anymore, when no one understands what it means when you suddenly flash bright green. And so it was, that was kind of a fun thing to do. I also, I'll I'll be honest here. I really love the desert Southwest, and one of the reasons I love the desert Southwest is the sky, right? I mean, and big sky, and I wanted that to have a place in the book too. So there are a couple of sunsets and and sunrises in this book, because gotta appreciate those things.
The rapture felt in those moments of the book. I think you have to have seen the skies of the desert Southwest
Yeah.
to appreciate that. And it was wonderful seeing that happen for the first time, and
Mhm.
also how it allowed other characters viewing that to to see it anew.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really wonderful. So this book is obviously science fiction. It's got a lot of aliens, and
Yeah.
you ticked all the boxes there. But it also has a lot of elements of a spy thriller novel.
Mhm.
Can you speak about the blending of genres in your work and what that means for a writer, what it means for a publisher, what it means for the reader? Because I know it's a different assessment of genre for all of those categories.
Uh-huh. I One of the things I like about spy stories is, I guess I see the bones of this as a spy story, and the reason why is it's about like discovering secrets that, and independent action, revealing secrets that others would want to keep hidden. I don't know, but it strikes me that the spy genre is incredibly vast, encompassing things from like the most hard-boiled James Bond to the most ridiculous James Bond, which is science fiction, to Spy, which is frankly one of my favorite movies, and is realistic but comic. And so then we get into the weirdness of marketing, and I feel really lucky that Catherine was, who I know is watching. Hey, Catherine, it was willing to take a risk on such a book that brought things together that aren't normally brought together. And yeah, but I think, yeah, honestly, I think you can't really rip the two things apart. Is it more a spy? I think the bones of it are a spy novel. The solution to it is like big picture politics, and so, but you can't do obviously aliens without aliens. So
Did you know going into the writing process that it was going to be a blend of these things, or had you intended to go in one direction and you found yourself going in another?
it was always a blend. The process with this book is a weird one that I will probably never quite do again. I wrote the first section, which was which is pretty much to the end of the road trip. And if you read the book, you'll know where that is. And then I finished there and I thought, I really left those characters in an untenable situation and I better figure out how to get them out of it. And that's how it became a whole novel. It was, yeah, it was not, it's not the way in general, I am one of those people who starts at the beginning and tries to think of a problem big enough to last for an entire book. But the complications develop organically as I'm writing and characters just show up as I'm writing. And then at the end, I attempt to smooth it out so it looks like it was all intended. But it usually doesn't have that sharper break where I think, oh yeah, I should not stop right there. I've got to keep going.
So you've also written books of history. How has this affected your writing of fiction? And yeah, how do those two worlds interact for you in your writing?
Honestly, history taught me a lot of lessons that I'll be clear. There are things that I learned from writing history that I try to take into my fiction. And the biggest one is the sort of telling detail, right? The idea that you can use little fragments of imagery or story to reveal a whole world. And that is something that definitely goes over. However, when I write history, I'm trying to prove a point, right? I'm trying to get you to think something, and I'm trying to muster my argument so everybody agrees with me. Everyone who reads my book agrees with me. I know they're not going to, but that's the intention of writing history. Taking that over to fiction really worked up my fiction for a long time. And one of the best pieces of advice I got, this was many years ago at a wonderful workshop called Viable Paradise, which I recommend to everybody because it's awesome. But the advice I got was that when you write a story, you should have a question at the center, the answer to which you do not know. And I kind of hope that when you read my fiction, you're going to have different opinions about the characters, about the way they handle situations, about who is right in a situation. And, you know, I don't want you following along exactly with me because I feel like that deadens the book. And the books the stories I wrote before I realized that, it was like, oh my God, we've all learned a valuable little lesson. And that's not what people usually want from their fiction. So I find often that when I write now, I try to back up and make sure I've put in the moments where we don't know whether a characters perceive the situation correctly, or if they need to if they've been unfair, if they've been unkind, if they've just been plain wrong.
So where is the dividing line for you between fiction and nonfiction as far as, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about motivation when writing
Right.
history, but how do you, is that a mood-based thing? It's time to write a fiction book. It's time to write a nonfiction book. What compels you in one direction or the other? And how different are the processes, particularly in the research phase for the books?
Oh, they're incredibly different. So history, when I do a history project, basically I have to do all the research first. And for a really complex project, like one of the things I keep telling myself I'm going to do is there's a history, I want to write a history based on the papers of one particular guy named Stephen Girard in Philadelphia. To do that, I'm going to have to actually go and read all the papers from this one particular guy, so I know where the book is, because you have to base the book on the evidence. And for novels, it really is much more flinging myself against the jello of my imagination until a recognizable shape is whittled out of the jello. My God, that's a bad metaphor. But it's that's um I try to start with characters, tension between them, and some idea of the plot. Where it goes from there, for me, it really has to be revealed in the telling. So it's unfortunately, neither of these processes is fast, but there are people who can write both things much quicker than I am, and my God, I wish I were one of them. But it's you have to do what you can with the brain you have.
Thinking about some of the aliens in the book, that might not have been such a bad metaphor after all. Uh, so you also work as an agent.
I do.
How has this affected the way you write? Maybe tell us a little bit about what that job is like. I know for a lot of authors, we're curious.
Sure.
It's a mysterious element of the
Mhm.
industry. And what are some of the most important things you've learned working as an agent that have changed you as a writer?
Good question. So um, the first uh, the first thing I learned is how important the opening of your book is. And there are certain ways I will never, ever, ever start a book because I know from the other side, and this happens to everybody who reads a lot of slush, by the way, they realize really quickly where the cliches are buried. And for example, some of these you guys, like anyone who's watching this can probably think of character waking up and looking in the mirror. One I see a lot, I have no idea why, is a bird swooping slowly over the person who turns out to be the main character. We first see our hero from the perspective of a bird. I do not know why. Another one that's tricky is your heroine or hero is running through a forest or a city away from somebody. They don't know who they are. So the first thing that I learned is you have to start a book with your hero being most themselves, right? And nobody is most themselves when they're physically drained or just waking up. And that's why those openings don't usually work. So first thing, yeah, importance of opening. The second thing I learned is that when a book doesn't find its place in the market, often it has nothing to do with the quality of the book. I see a lot of books that just aren't what the market is looking for. They're too long. They are part of a series when series aren't what's desirable at the moment. They are following a fashion of that's no longer really being purchased, lots of things like that. And often it's still a really good book, it's just not what the market wants. Um, and I think, I mean, that's a really hard thing to hear as a writer, that sometimes it's not that you wrote a bad book, you just didn't write a book that was what editors were looking for. Um, I think so. The way to handle that is, you just do the work you want to do, and I think you have to celebrate everything good that happens to you because you can't control when it happens, but you have to really relish it when it does. Yeah. Um, Also, everything in publishing takes forever, and there's there's no way to make it go faster. Um, and then when it happens, it'll go really fast, and so you have to be kind of ready for that too.
Got a great question from the audience here. This one's from
Ooh,
Jonathan.
okay.
Um, can you tell us about balancing thriller pacing with science fiction world building?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. Hmm. So some people love building worlds, right? And a lot of people come to their initial meeting, their initial introduction to the wonderful world of science fiction and fantasy is because they're gamers. And they love, and part of what they love about it is the world building thing, the idea that you could make up paragraphs and paragraphs of what this realm is like and everybody's powers and how the rules work and all that cool stuff. And you can write really good books like a lot of people, that is the way they start their books. They create all the world building. Sorry, the hands are going crazy here. All of the world building and put that all together. But when it comes time to actually write the book, you want to be the reader wants to be swept away. And the thing I always tell people is something that I heard Teresa Nielsen Hayden once say, and she's way smarter than I am. So here's what she said: people who do science fiction and fantasy have been trained to world build from details. Like if you see, if I open up a novel and somebody's going by wearing a top hat with gears pasted to it, I think, aha, steampunk. So you can, the thing that's important to do if you've got a lot of world building is to think about how much does the audience for this book actually need. If you were doing a space opera, for example, you can just say that the ship goes faster than light if you want to. You don't have to talk about how this is actually possible in your world, usually. So that's the sort of balance I try to find. Think about how much your reader will actually need.
So a moment ago, you talked about the importance of opening in books, and
Mhm.
I wonder if you would be willing to indulge me in reading a
Sure.
little bit of chapter 1, because this was one of the funniest openings I've read in a long time. And immediately I was like, what kind of ride am I in for? Yeah, if you don't mind indulging us.
Sure. Let's go through. I'm going to skip the prologue, even though, do we have prologues or not? I needed a prologue because it's got a big messy plot. Yeah. Okay. Dana Elson sat in her rental car, rain pounding against the windshield, and thought about rainbow daydreams and the pitch that was going to change her life. She imagined striding into their office in her chic dress, tights, and boots, her statement earrings swinging, her samples tucked in her briefcase. She'd shake hands confidently with the whole acquisitions team. Then she'd tell them how her new series would fit into their roster of calendar-based gift items. After that, she'd open the carrying case, revealing her sample. A beam of sunlight would emerge from a nearby window to illuminate its hand-painted glory. Everyone would be awestruck. Then they'd give her $1 million cash. Sure, why not? Dana sighed and watched the rain. Less than 24 hours until her real presentation, and she was making herself crazy. But how was she supposed to relax when she knew how important this deal would be? What she really wanted to do was call her mom, who always knew how to tell her when she was worrying too much. If only that were possible. She picked up the soda in the cup holder and took a big swig. Dana would later reflect that this was the exact point at which her life had forked from its intended direction because her soda bottle was still in her briefcase. The soda she'd drunk from had been left by the car's previous occupant, and something terrible had happened to it. A slippery lump of something disgusting slid down her throat and caught, slowly oozing downward. Dana choked, gagged, swung the driver's side door open, and caught herself just before throwing up on a stranger's shoes. The shoes belonged to a man who was giving her a sharp, cold, terrifying look that made her burrow backwards into her seat. Automatically, she noted the details that she would put into a sketch. He was bald, blue-eyed, thin, and very pale. His jeans, gray hoodie, and black leather jacket were sodden with rain, but he didn't seem to notice. He glared at her, and she bit the inside of her lip, willing herself to keep silent and still. "That's mine," he said. He reached over her and took the empty soda bottle from the cup holder. Then he shut the door and walked off into the rain. Suddenly, Dana was eager to leave, no matter how nauseous she was.
Thank you for indulging me. And what the
Sure.
gelatinous lump she swallowed is, it really is. I loved that as an opener. Very funny.
Thank you.
So before we go, I wanted to ask, what are you currently working on? What's up next from you? What can we be expecting from you? Are you going to be working more with Queen of Swords Press?
And I would always work again with of Swords Press. We actually live literally 10 minutes from each other. So we have had a bunch of local events. We were just at the Twin Cities Book Festival. We went to a street fair where I got to, yell out to people coming by, "We have books," which is amazing. That is super fun. Yeah, so I see Catherine all the time. One of the I am sort of I have the whole thing, but it needs some rewrites. It's a story about a woman and her ex-boyfriend. Um, yes, I stop people with corgis specifically. So it's a novel about set in a so it's a different planet, secondary world science fiction, where there's one big island where one country in it has been at war with each other, and our heroine is from the side that dramatically lost. She and her ex-boyfriend, with whom there is still a lot of energy, are forced to take a trip together to the other side of the wall, to make sure a lost teenage girl gets home. It's basically it's funny, I would say, less of a comedy than this one, but it's sort of it's funny the whole way through too. It's in sort of because of my particular process, this one's a lot more heavy plot and more coherent plot than obviously Aliens. So it's getting some rewrites, so it all makes sense together. But hopefully it's got some of the same relationship energy and people with nothing in common being forced to work together, and secret spies that this book does. One of my favorite characters is he appears originally as a religious figure, but it turns out that's a disguise, and he's a spy, and he won't tell anyone what he's really on the ship for. And he is just a wonderful pill of a human being and a total delight to write for. So I like characters who are just obnoxious to be enough to be to irritate the other characters without actually being bad people. It's a wonderful dynamic for a comic book, a comedic book, sorry. There's no illustration. The other thing I'm doing, and this is just because I thought sounded like fun, is trying to write a TV pilot of obviously Aliens. And it has been a ton of fun to try to put together. So it's a totally different kind of writing altogether.
Would this be your first screenplay, or is this something you've delved into before?
It's something I fooled around with before, and always there's a wonderful local screenwriters workshop in Minneapolis, and the fun thing about screenwriting is they're so short compared to a novel that you can actually, if you go to a writer's group, you can actually read each other's work out loud. And I love that sort of table reads are super fun to do. I love the energy of playing off other readers. So yeah.
Well, obviously Aliens would make a splendid program. I
Oh,
hope
thank
that
you.
works out.
That could be fun.
Obviously Aliens, there is a link in the chat to get this book. If you're watching on YouTube later, it's down below. Pick this up. You will not regret it. You will never look at corgis the same. Thank you so much to our audience for being here. Thank you so much, Jennie Goloboy, for sharing your work with us and indulging us in this interview. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and we hope to see you next time.